Just a note about self-empathy in conversations around white supremacy, around whiteness, power and privilege. There's fear, there's a lot of fear around disconnection and safety. The fears are high. So just take a moment just to connect to what helps you bring compassion to yourself when there is fears around disconnection. Just a little note for what is it that helps you ground? Is it breathing or feeling your feet on the ground, or remembering someone that is super supportive for you, or a little self-hug or something, or just naming intentions, acknowledging intention. What is it that helps you stay self-connected? And I want to acknowledge that any kind of intercultural dialogue, that when we're having conversations around racism, it's not a level playing field. It's even though white people might be anxious entering intercultural dialogue around whiteness and white supremacy, it's much harder, and there are greater costs from people from global majority, BIPOC, or I'll just say a little bit about terminology. I know in the UK we often use the word BAME. I really don't like the phrase BAME, so I kind of tend to use BIPOC rather than BAME. But I prefer actually the term people from global majority, because that feels much more inclusive and kind of grounding and settling. So the costs for people from global majority to participate are much higher, because that's the thing about racialization. It's about win-lose. So just acknowledging that it's not a level playing field. And what can we do to create more equity as we're having this conversation? So, and a lot of this learning came from the previous conversation that we had around ending racism a year ago, more than a year ago. So yeah, we made some mistakes in the organizing. I made some mistakes in the organizing, and we're sort of learning with that as well. So one thing is that, you know, it's kind of more realistic that we're encouraging brave space, not safe space. So it's more realistic. And still, we want to keep trying to create more equity. So if you are BIPOC or from global majority, please let us know anything that will support you during the session. This went out in the joining instructions. But if you didn't read that, if you read that quickly, just let us know, let either the whole of us know or me and Viv know anything that will support you during the session, which could be that to be in breakout rooms with other people from global majority, something like that, or anything else. And we will remind ourselves regularly that talking and hearing about white supremacy and racism is more painful for people of colour than for white people. So we'll just keep reminding ourselves that to create a stronger sense of shared reality. And that was a really helpful bit of feedback that we got from after our last conversation, that we keep reminding ourselves this, keep reminding us, white people, this, so we don't forget. And if there are white speakers and global majority speakers, we invite global majority speakers to speak first. So a greater sense of shared reality around difficult experiences can be established earlier on. No pressure to speak and no expectation to educate, just an openness, a willingness to listen and learn. So we'll keep reminding and checking about that. And these are some of the things that I've heard from people from the global majority, which are invitations for white people, and I really like them. These are things I've heard in trainings that I've done with Victor Lee Lewis and other people. So develop a willingness to be humble, because white people don't know what they don't know. We don't know what we don't know. So just a willingness to be humble. And I really love this. Join the rest of the family. It's like, that's such an open-hearted invitation. Come and join us, white people. I really like that. Come and join the rest of the family. Accept some instruction. Again, being humble. We've been studying you for some time. It's like, you know, the concept of whiteness may be new for some white people, but people of colour, people from a global majority have been super aware of this for a long time, and studying and being aware. So white people, we can be courageous, we can afford to be. It's a good risk. We can be brave. And although the tendency in racialized conversations to be fight, fight, flight, or freeze. We're aiming to be in social engagement. We're aiming to connect. We're aiming to reach out and connect to each other. So here are some invitations for white people that I've picked up along the way. Here's for a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King: "Whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting in a similar mass effort to educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America or anywhere believe they have so little to learn." And still, you know, 60 years later, this is still unfortunately very true. So putting it in there. So one element that it's important that we acknowledge for a bit of shared reality is that race is a construct. So we need to acknowledge that race is not a fact, but a sociological construct. We are racialized as black and white. And I was at an XR event recently where there was Elder Kojo was there. This was in Brixton. And Elder Kojo did this amazing thing. He got a piece of paper and he said, "This is white. This is what white is. You know, white people aren't white." And I just really appreciated that. It helped me understand more that, you know, this thing of white is a construct. You know, I'm not like a piece of paper, you know, have different pigmentation, but we kind of accept these categories and categorization. So appreciating that helped me kind of see a little bit more the construct. And with the construct comes socialization and conditioning. And white people, we are socialized to ignore how systems of violence and inequality show up. When it comes to racism, many white people are like fish swimming in water. White supremacy is the water, and it's hard for white people to even see that it's there. And of course, you know, the system that we live in, the richest people need white supremacy to remain invisible. So the plundering of our planet can keep happening. So there is pushback when we start talking about white supremacy. Just acknowledging that too. And that racism is a system, and that many people still don't understand the definition of racism. And that it gets confused with prejudice or bigotry. Anyone can be prejudiced against anyone, but it depends if your prejudice is backed by a culture or a system or a history. So a person from the global majority can be prejudiced against a white person, but not racist, because there's no system supporting that bias. So all kinds of systems support white people's bias against people from the global majority, and that's what makes it racist. So just awareness of the system that we're living in, and that racism is a system rather than individual acts, as well as individual acts. And here's how kind of one way this links into MVC. It's about individualizing tendencies. So we often see all kinds of practitioners, but including MVC practitioners, pull people out of systems. They individualize. Even that statement, "be the change you want to see," which is a beautiful statement, and there's a lot of truth in it, but on some level it ignores the system, because there is a system here that may mean that we can't be the change that we want to see. So we need to do the work on dismantling the system, and when we need to work on our common humanity, we need both. This current point in time, it's not a time for either or. And notice if you get comfortable in one of these places, either just dismantling the system or just working on our common humanity and empathic connection. So we need both. And just acknowledging that those with more power can center themselves quite unconsciously is really helpful in conversations that we have. And this could show up as speaking more or making decisions for others. And if people with power get upset, the care and the attention goes to them. And that white supremacy conditions the majority to take care of white people. People with power have more freedom to do what they want. So just acknowledging, just bringing in an acknowledgement of all of these things that can happen. So what the invitation is today is that we're going to have a couple of breakout rooms. We're going to have a breakout room with this kind of groundwork for shared reality that I've just covered very quickly now, but I'd love us to sort of go into breakout rooms and just unpack it a little bit. And the invitation is to notice how you feel in your body with what we have covered so far. So some of you may know that Sarah Payton and Roxy Manning are doing really good work around our nervous systems and white supremacy, and done a bit of work with them. And the questions lower down are from both of their pieces of work. So here are a couple of questions, and please take total freedom to do what you like with these questions. How do you feel in your body with what we've covered so far? How does white supremacy affect you? And know that a lot of white people can't answer that question. So let's just see if we can have a go at that. How do white people benefit? And what does it take from white people? So if you are from global majority, you could respond to how white supremacy affects you, or do whatever you want with these questions and with what we've covered so far. And the connection to the body is just notice what happens to you, your breath, your muscles, your face, your stomach, when you consider that you benefit from a system that harms others. It's a question from those with privilege or white privilege. And in areas where you don't have privilege, how does your body respond to the naming of harm? So there's two invitations just to really deeply connect to what happens to us, to connect to our bodies, and to connect to the embodiment of this. And just again want to credit Sarah Payton and Roxy Manning for those two last questions. This is a nice thing to have, and some of you may have watched the hour-long conversation which we posted in the event information. And the research that Dr. Helms has done is to look really to study whiteness and to explore 6 schemas or lenses around whiteness and around which we interpret racialized events. And she's got these kind of 6 categories, and the first is what she calls contact, and it's when kind of white people, it's all about different phases of whiteness, when people are naive or oblivious and say, I don't see color. They're in that kind of they see the world through that lens. And then there's another lens, which is what she calls disintegration, which is where fragility comes into this, the confusion, the anxiety, the fear, the disorientation, the guilt. It's just like completely not knowing how to be in the face of racialized events and talking about them. So disintegration, that's one schema. Another schema is what she calls reintegration, is one that maintains the superiority, that thinks that superiority is deserved. So that's another lens through which white people can view the world. And then the other ones, there's a little gap because there are other ones here. One, pseudo-independence, which might be an intellectual or superficial understanding of the issues. And she puts white liberalism in here. And this may feel oppressive to people of color, to people from global majority, because it's there's a superficiality to it. And then immersion, and where there's a step towards taking responsibility. I'm going to talk about racism, even if I don't do it correctly. Some of us have mentioned that tonight. And then what she calls the schema, which she calls autonomy, where you're deeply considering how racism influences our situation, how racism is influencing our organization, hopefully taking steps to change that. But these are the 6 schemas that Dr. Helms has come up with, which I find really helpful. And I want us just to put that in so we can go take that into the second breakout room, where let's look at this question: how is racism and white privilege influencing your contexts and organizations? So that could be NVC networks, it could be other organizations you're associated with. So that's the question. And again, kind of what happens to you, your breath, your muscles, your face, as you consider that as well, just to keep coming back to the body as you're considering this, to slow it down a little bit. So we might start thinking about things and just to stop the dissociating as well, and just to keep coming back to the body, just to keep inviting in the body's response to all of this. So I will